I think that's when the resentment started. That's like a very strong emotion I've had throughout the past years, resentment. And my mom asked me, what's wrong? And I remember snapping at her and just being like, what do you think is wrong? And that was just the start of it. I just got very angry. Anger is an emotion that like hides a lot of other emotions. And I think as I was dissociated, I just felt anger. Like I was sitting at my graduation the next day and my friend, my really good friend of a long time, was eating a snack, veggie straws. And I was just sitting there like, could you eat those veggie straws without thinking about it? Like she was offering me one and I was like, no, I'm good. Because she didn't even know I hadn't been diagnosed yet. I didn't tell anyone. So I was like, no, I'm good. Just angry. So angry for so long. And I think that's really, as I was dissociated, what I was feeling.
Welcome to the Reclaim Your Rise podcast. My name is Lauren Bongiorno, nationally board certified health coach and founder and CEO of Risely Health, where we help people and families impacted by type 1 diabetes take ownership over their lives so that they can transform with more freedom and confidence. Everyone has a different reason to be here. You might be seeking knowledge, support, or community, but at your core, I know that you long for something deeper. You're here for transformation. And that's what the Reclaim Your Rise podcast is all about. A quick reminder before we start the show that nothing you hear on the Reclaim Your Rise podcast should be a substitute for personalized professional medical advice. Please always consult your physician or other medical professional before making any changes to your diet, insulin dosages, or healthcare plan. Hey everyone, welcome back to Reclaim Your Rise. I am very excited for today's episode, not only because of the guest that is joining me, but also because this is the official kickoff episode for the show being on YouTube. So that means that you can not only listen, but you could also watch, you can interact through the comments on the things that you're hearing and put in your point of view, which I'm really excited to hear. And all you have to do is subscribe to Risely Health and you'll be able to view the Reclaim Your Rise shows from here on out. But let's get into it for today. So my guest is Soph Mosca, and she has a really interesting type 1 diabetes diagnosis story because of the fact that when she was diagnosed with type 1 a little bit over a year ago, April of 2022, she already had a social media following of over 1 million people. And so as a content creator, she was used to sharing all the parts of her life, and this wasn't going to be any different. But since her audience was primarily not people who were living with type 1 diabetes or really understood type 1 diabetes, Sophia had to really navigate a lot of people's misjudgments and advice. And we talk about that in the episode today. So we also dive into Soph's entire diagnosis story, her near-death experience, her journey with acceptance, the one that she kind of is still on, diabetes burnout we talk about, and also the vision that she has for herself and her life with diabetes moving forward and really for the next 5 years. Without further ado, help me welcome Soph Mosca to the podcast, and let's rise. Soph, thank you so much for joining me on the show today. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me.
I feel like when a type 1 gets asked, how are you doing? It's such like a different, you're like, well, how much do you want me to tell you about my day? Because there's like more than just like, yeah, I'm fine, right? We never like say that. So how are you really doing?
Good question. It's actually funny you say that because I talk about that with my friends all the time. Like, if they're like, okay, how are you? Whatever. And I'll be like, I'm good. Unless you want me to talk about diabetes. Then it might get a little more detailed. But I'm coming out of like my first burnout with diabetes, I would say. I'm on the way up, but I would say the last month or so, I was just having a rough go around with, I guess, just still working on the acceptance of it all and the adjusting to living with it and everything. So really, I'm okay. I wasn't doing so hot, but I am on my way up from that, I think.
So relatively, you're better than you were like 2 weeks ago, maybe.
Yes. You caught me at a good time.
Okay, good. Well, and I mean, like, I want to get into that too eventually, just like the acceptance journey of it, because it's so different. It's so weird how everybody has, right, like a different timeline for their acceptance. Like for me, I was diagnosed at 7, and I thought my whole life, I'm like, oh yeah, like I accept diabetes, like I'm, strong, I can do anything, like everything that the stories about what other people told me. And then I hit like 19 years old and I was away at college for the first time, and I was like, whoa, like I have a lot to unpack here that like I've suppressed for like so many years. So I just think that like your level of openness just in the first year, like I'm excited to pull back all the layers on that. But I want to start off with a signature question that I ask everybody who comes on the show. So type 1 diabetes usually gives rise a bad reputation, right? We don't want our A1C to go up. We don't want our numbers to go up. We don't want our CGMs to go up. But in the Risely, community, we're all about helping people reclaim their rise, to rise above their diagnosis, to rise above their challenges. So could you share a story with us about a time in the past year of living with type 1 diabetes that you felt that you reclaimed your rise, even if it was like a moment in time?
Yeah, I think honestly, it was just, I'm sure we'll get into it, but so I was diagnosed at 22, and having to go from living 22 years without diabetes, figuring out how to be like, I had already figured out how I was as an adult, but having to readjust who I am and what I do and everything. I think just that alone has been the biggest, like, I just had to grab it within myself and just say, okay, this is how it is. This is what's going to happen. I'm going to take it and run with it. And I already had a platform on social media. So I think I just sort of took it as, okay, this is part of my story. It's going to be added into my social media, and just as best I can, make it into something positive. And that's really what I've spent the last a little bit over a year doing.
So really for you, it was about, okay, I have this thing, and now how do I include it in who I am? And I am a growing individual. And so growing on, showing that growth with all of your audience and taking them along the way that you did that for, any other thing that came into your life before that. So let's go back a little bit to the diagnosis. What do we need to understand for those listening who don't really have background and context to what your diagnosis was like what parts of it do you feel like are really important to know, or for to share about how you were diagnosed and those early days?
Yeah. So my story's, I mean, everyone's story is very interesting. But so I was at diagnosis in DKA,
Mm.
which not everyone is in, but I think it does sort of add an extra thing to the story. Um, and I think this is actually something that I've noticed recently that I want to kind of bring up, but I think that I was getting sick for a lot longer than I thought I was. Um, I can look back 2 years ago, over a year before I was diagnosed, almost 2 years before I was diagnosed, and I could already tell in my eyes my blood sugar was high.
Mm.
Um, but I, for the longest time, ignored my symptoms because, oh, I mean, they were gradual. So I ignored and I ignored and I ignored. And I just assumed because I had been healthy my whole life. And I mean, I didn't even need braces. I didn't need glasses. Like, I never had to go see the doctor. And I just assumed it was nothing. And I ignored and ignored and ignored. And I think that's something that I always try to emphasize when I am talking about my diagnosis story, that, like, if anyone's having any symptoms ever, just go and, like, make sure you're good. But yeah, so I was really not feeling well for a long time. I had every symptom of type 1 diabetes in the book. I had excessive thirst, and my symptoms were amplified for probably about 6 months before I was diagnosed.
Mm.
I was drinking, I mean, gallons of water a day, like gallons, and could never quench my thirst. I was losing a lot of weight, and I'm already a relatively small person, but I ignored that as well because I am also super active. And I was just like, you know what? I've been consistent with Peloton. Like, I must just be losing weight from being so consistent. But looking back on it, I was very unhealthy, but it was just gradual. So I just didn't think anything of it. And I was also just really moody and out of it and had brain fog, but I put that as, oh, I'm in college and I work a full-time job and I'm just stressed. And towards the end, it was really bad. I was also excessively hungry, but still losing weight. I mean, I would eat like 7 massive cookies, still be hungry, just could never fill up, was craving foods I haven't craved since I was 7. Just everything sounded good. I always wanted more and more. And then towards the very end, I noticed my hair was thinning out a lot. And I always would be like, my eyes look sunken in. Why do my eyes look sunken in? And it was even as extreme as one night shortly before I went into the hospital, I peed the bed. 22 years
Mm.
old, haven't peed the bed since I don't even think I did it as a kid. Peed the bed, middle of the night. Um, and I had Googled my symptoms, but again, had always been healthy. So what came up was type 1 diabetes. But I was uneducated and I was like, well, I wasn't born with that. And I was uneducated and was like, well, it's not type 2 because of the stereotypes that go along with type 2. And so I ignored. But I went home and because I live in Florida, but I'm from New Hampshire and I was going to be graduating college in New Hampshire. And my dad's a type 2 diabetic. So I went home and he was like, let's prick your finger. Let's just check your blood sugar. And um, it just said high. And my dad was like, well, that's not accurate. It said that before because he said, I know it can only say that if it's over 500. And so we took it again and it said high again. And then he was convinced. He's like, no, 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 something must be wrong with it. So then he took his blood sugar. We took everyone else in the house's blood sugar. Theirs was all normal for them. So we're like, okay, interesting. So long story short, we ended up going into the hospital and when I got to the hospital, my blood sugar was up to 780. I believe that was the highest that they told me it was at least. And I was in DKA. So I spent the night in the ICU and fully convinced I was dying. Like my brain had fully, I, I actually I wrote a diagnosis story that's online that people can read. But in there, I talked about how I genuinely thought I was dying. No one was really telling me much. The doctors weren't saying anything. I just knew it was serious. And I was getting put in the rooms when there was people in the hallway and I was getting like shoved here and shoved there and poked here and poked there, but no one was telling me anything. And I thought I was dying. Which I guess technically I was, but not actually because I was safe once I was in the hospital. But yeah, I ended up convincing them to let me leave early so I could still walk at my graduation. And I graduated college the day after being diagnosed with type 1 diabetes.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so you think you're dying one day, you're like you have your whole hat and tassel and everything on the next day. All right, we have to can we pull this apart a little bit because I'm sure there's a lot from like I'm dying to like we're going to go graduate college. So when you were there, what everything was going on around you, what was your, I guess, like support system like? Like, were you there by yourself? Were there siblings, parents with you, friends? Like, was it, yeah, like just describe a little bit about like what that support system was like.
Do you mean like in the hospital?
Yeah, like, I mean, I know that there are so many people that like just are like, oh, let me just go to the hospital, check it out. And then they're just there by themselves and like processing it. So, were you processing it alone? Were you processing it with other people?
So my mom and my ex-girlfriend came with me. She was my girlfriend at the time. And there was still some COVID regulation. I mean, I'm sure in hospitals there still is now, but there was COVID
Mhm.
regulations then. And that's actually part of why I knew something was really wrong because they were allowing me guests and extra guests when guests were not allowed.
Hmm.
So yeah, it was my mom, my ex-girlfriend, and then the next day my dad came by as well. But it was enough for me. Like I definitely needed someone there. I couldn't imagine doing that on my own. I will maybe get to this too, but I was completely dissociated and just having them there at least kept me somewhat grounded. So
Mhm.
I can't even imagine if anyone had gone in like by themselves or anything like that.
Well, yeah, like I was even thinking too, like trying to like put myself in your shoes because I know for at least me, I was so young, but when I was diagnosed, everyone around me was crying. And so it was almost like I had to be the strong one. And I think that set the precedent for like so many years of just being like not wanting to tell anybody when my blood sugar was high or low or like shielding it because I was like, I don't want anybody else to worry because that trauma of the day getting diagnosed, seeing like my mom for the first time crying and like my grandparents and like all everything going on around me. So were you, when you say you were dissociated, like can you describe a little bit about that? Were you still like able to tap into the emotions of what was happening?
So, yes and no. I thought I was tapping into it, but then months later realized I really wasn't. But I think I was just my main thing while I was in the hospital was they better let me out of here and let me graduate because I just spent
Hmm.
4 years and so much money. I better be able to graduate. And so at first, like when I was still even just in the ER, hadn't even moved up to ICU, I was crying because they told me I probably wasn't going to make it to my graduation. I hadn't even really
Mm.
understood what was happening, what was going to change. I was just upset about my graduation. And so that was the majority of the hospital was me like so upset that I wasn't going to make it to my graduation. And then once I was sort of like, okay, I have diabetes question mark because I talked about this in my diagnosis story that I wrote too, but no one like they didn't ever say you have type 1 diabetes. The way I found out was a EMT worker came in to, I think he checked my blood sugar. I have like very little memory of this night. That's part of the dissociation.
Hmm.
And he lifted up his sleeve to show his Dexcom and he was like, "You're going to be okay, blah blah blah." And I was like, "What?" He just said I'm a type 1
Right.
diabetic. I'm not a type 1 diabetic. Like, what?
And how do you know before I know?
Yeah, exactly. So that was like the first time I even heard it. But yeah, I was really just upset about the graduation. And then I remember I just felt scared and sad, but I didn't really know how to process that or what it was directed towards. But then my ex-girlfriend was really, really supportive and was really great and was writing down everything the doctors were saying and taking pictures of all the paperwork. And she went on TikTok and was showing me like, look at this diabetic, like doing normal
Mm.
things, living a normal life. And there's this one girl on TikTok who organizes things just in general. And she has one where she organizes her diabetes supplies because she's type 1 diabetic. And so she was showing me that. And I got kind of excited for some reason. Like I just had all these weird emotions. And then I got in the car after they let me leave and I wasn't sad about not making it to my graduation anymore because I was going to be making it to my graduation. And I remember I got in the car, I closed the door, and I just started bawling. And I think in that moment, I felt very I think that's when the resentment started. That's like a very strong emotion I've had throughout the past years, resentment. And my mom asked me, "What's wrong?" And I remember snapping at her and just being like, "What do you think is wrong?" And that was just the start of it. I just got very angry. And anger is an emotion that like hides a lot of other emotions. And I think as I was dissociated, I just felt anger. Like I was sitting at my graduation the next day and my friend, my really good friend of a long time, was eating a snack, veggie straws.
Hmm.
And I was just sitting there like, you get to eat those veggie straws without thinking about it. Like she was offering me one and I was like, no, I'm good. Because she didn't even know I had been diagnosed yet. I didn't tell anyone.
Wow.
So I was like, no, I'm good. Just angry. So angry for so long. And I think that's really, as I was dissociated, what I was feeling.
Well, it sounds like you really just were kept in the dark, even from like the very beginning of like what was actually going on in your body. And if you were discharged the next day, I'm sure you probably didn't even leave with a full like understanding beyond probably like your pancreas doesn't produce insulin anymore and you have to give insulin for carbs and you have to count your carbs. Like it was probably the basics that you left with probably so many questions too of like what can't I do anymore, and like how am I going to leave here and feel like I can actually do this and also not be and maybe that's where too like the anger came from. Would you say like what was that was part of what was below the anger?
Oh my gosh. Yes. And I got no information. I got,
Ugh.
you're going to need a lot of support. That's what I got from the doctor. That's all he said. And I swear, I still say to this day, TikTok taught me more than any doctor ever did.
Hmm.
I learned so much from other creators, type 1 diabetic creators online. And it's really interesting because since I make videos, I can look back on my early days and the things I thought I couldn't do is insane. I genuinely thought I couldn't, like, I can, I'm now back to living my life how I did before diagnosis, just, adding in certain things. But when I was first diagnosed, I thought everything had to change. And like, I mean, I think that's definitely where the anger resided. Like, I was just like, everything's different. My life
Hmm.
is over and this sucks. And that's all I really knew was just that this sucks.
So let me ask you, when you see all these people online sharing, them exercising and having type 1 diabetes, maybe with their pump on their arm or eating things that you were like, wait, I didn't think I could eat that. Did that also create for you like a big gap of like, or question in your head of like, how do I do that?
Yes, big time. It did give me a lot of hope though, because I was like, okay, if they can do it. And like, my biggest thing for the first few months was like, so scared of the long term possible things that can happen.
Mm-hmm.
And I was convinced that they were going to start happening like immediately. And so I'd see someone doing something that I thought I couldn't do, and I'd be like, well, they don't look like they have retinopathy. Like, they're fine. And it was just like this weird comfort. But I was like, how? Like, how is that girl drinking a venti Starbucks drink with full sugar? How? Just so, but it gave me hope more so than anything else. I was just like, I will be okay. I just got to figure it out.
Mm-hmm. So, in those first couple of months, let's say that you were diagnosed, how did that evolve? How did the anger evolve? How did your education evolve? How did you get from, oh my gosh, I'm gonna die to, okay, like maybe I can handle this?
Yeah. So, as a person, I'm very much like, I'm going to make it work. And I think I just, in a way, this hurt me because I was repressing a lot, but I was just sort of like, okay, we're going to just make the best of it and we're going to just do it. And I think just every day I just would push myself to do something I was scared of. Or, I mean, at first, like, my apartment had a pool, and I was too scared to even go there. I didn't even want to go to the pool downstairs. And it was just little things like, okay, today I'm going to go to the pool. And I would go and it'd be okay. And I'd be like, okay, I did that. And then I did my first weekend away from my apartment and I was petrified. I packed like enough low snacks for 6 years. I packed every like bottle of insulin I owned and just, but I still did it. I still went, and what I brought was excessive and the anxiety I had was excessive, but I did it. And then I was like, okay, I can go away for a weekend. Turns out I can go away for however long I want. I have to plan. And it was just living with it that slowly but surely I learned, okay, I need this much insulin for this, and this affects me this way, and this exercise does this. And when I go here, I need this. And it was just, the more I lived with it, the more I learned. And the more I watched TikToks and befriended type 1 diabetic creators, and they could help me and I could ask them personal questions. It was the combination of that and living with it that really got me going and taught me what I needed to know in order to like keep living with it.
All right, very brief intermission here. If you follow both Sophia and myself on social media, you may see that we both proudly wear the tubeless Omnipod 5 automated insulin delivery system. Whether you've been living with diabetes for a few weeks, a few years, or maybe even a few decades, at the end of the day, we all share the same desire to experience more freedom in our lives and to not be limited by diabetes. We can work towards that in multiple different ways, but one way is through the technology that we use. I've been on the Omnipod 5 system for almost 9 months now, and it has been an absolute game changer. So I'm excited to share some exciting news with you today that if you go to omnipod.com/rise, you can see if you are eligible for a free 10-day trial. You can also view full safety information, instructions for use, and trial terms and conditions there. So head over to omnipod.com/rise today to potentially experience the freedom and the flexibility that Soph and I have for yourself. This decision could be the best next step towards reclaiming your rise. And of course, let us know if you do so that we can welcome you into the Omnipod fam. This episode is brought to you by Omnipod. Well, and I mean, like, isn't that like life at the bottom line? Like, when something happens that's never happened to you before, you have to go into a situation that feels like it creates or feels scary or you get anxious from it, right? Like, once you do it, you become a little bit more comfortable with it, right? And you're like, oh, wait, like, there's, I can do it, and it doesn't feel maybe as scary. So throughout that process, how much do you think other people knew, like the way you described that, right? Like that you're scared to go to the pool. And I think a lot of people can relate to that fear of when you're newly diagnosed. I mean, and I don't even want to say newly diagnosed. There are people that have had it for 20 years and they're afraid to try a new exercise because they don't know how it's going to impact their blood sugar. But like, how do you think other people around you in your close circle, or your friends at your graduation, like, do you think that they didn't understand because it was hard for them to conceptualize really what type 2 diabetes meant? Or do you think it was more so they couldn't conceptualize how difficult it was because you were closed off to letting people see that because you didn't want to be like a burden? Like, where would you kind of fall with that?
Yeah. So in terms of my friends, the circle of people who were around me was really my friends in Florida, and right from the bat they were very understanding and never questioned anything. If I was ever like, I need this or I don't want to do this, they were always just like, okay. Like, I could make a stupid request in the beginning when they were stupid requests and crazy, and they'd say okay, and they would just go along with it and just support me. um my ex-girlfriend, I think there was a disconnect because um, I think she didn't really understand why I was so afraid of doing things, because in her mind she knew I was going to be okay, but at
Hmm.
that point in time I couldn't see that. And so there was a disconnect between me being afraid of doing silly things like going away for the weekend, and her being like, you're just going away for the weekend, like you're bringing what you need, and you have like there's still hospitals there. If anything were to happen, it's the same as if it happens at your apartment. And there was the disconnect there of like, why are you so scared?
Hmm.
And then but I would say that she definitely saw the worst of it, and she saw just it tear me down for the first few months, and I think it was hard on her to see that while knowing I'm going to be okay. And I think to her that was like frustrating. And she was coping with that in her own way while I was coping with my stuff in my own way. And then with my family and my parents, I didn't really share much. I think the place I shared the most was honestly my YouTube videos, where I just sort of talked about how I was feeling at all points in time. And my mom watches those, so I guess that's where she kind of like picked up how I was feeling. But I never really opened up, I mean, even still, to my family. And I think I did that because other people worrying about me or checking in on me stresses me out. And I always prefer to like internalize it and handle it on my own, because a situation and like this was overwhelming enough. Having other people feeding into it made it so much worse. And so I knew I'd be better off just like keeping as much of it as I could within my own little space and handling it in my own little space. And while that is sort of unhealthy in a way, repressing, I think it is what I needed. Like, I needed to figure it out mentally myself versus like having other people like telling me I'm okay.
I think what's really hard about that and being a creator online and So in my experience, I've been on social media since I think for like 10 years at this point. And so I'm turning 30 this year. And so my early 20s is when probably like maybe like kind of like your timeline, right? Like I was an adolescent with like my prefrontal cortex, like decision making and like understanding myself, like nothing was really fully developed. And here I am putting myself out there. And I think your 20s are a really hard time to be on social media now, like going into this next decade in like hindsight, because you're figuring out like who you are, but you're figuring it out with like hundreds and thousands of the opinions of others. And you're going through things very much for the first time. You're going through breakups. You're going through maybe grieving loved ones for the first time. You're going through career changes. You're going through, finding your own confidence and sense of self. You're going through, in your case, right, which was a huge diagnosis, like you said in the beginning, that like rocked your world because you were quote unquote, like you identified with like a very healthy person up until diabetes. And so I could imagine that that was tough to navigate too, which is like, how do I share this if I don't even really understand how I feel about this?
Yeah, it was a lot, having people's input right off the bat, because I think now that I've lived with it for longer, people assume I know what I'm doing a little bit more. But at first, everyone had their 2 cents. Everyone, don't do this, don't do that, do this, do that, which some of it was helpful, but some of it I didn't want. But there's no stopping it when it's online. And then there was also those super ignorant comments of people literally a month after I was diagnosed being like, we get it, you have diabetes, and just sort of shutting me down. Or even now, I obviously going from being in DKA to being a much healthier person with my diabetes managed, obviously weight gain, and people continuously commenting on the weight gain, and they're nice about it. They're like, you look great, you put on weight, but just the weight comments. But before, when I was undiagnosed, they would tell me that I was losing weight, and just so many opinions and so many people's input all the time. It gets very tiring.
Hmm.
But I think I'm glad that I had already been a presence on social media for a few years before I was diagnosed, because I had already gotten used to kind of blocking out comments that didn't serve me.
Hmm.
So I'm thankful for that. But even still today, they get to me, or someone commenting just ignorant things every once in a while about diabetes. I'm just like, ugh, God, why?
It's hard. If you at 23 years old have like not figured out a way to not get affected by it, like props to you, because I mean, even just this morning, I have this post that like recently went viral of me giving a shot, even though I'm on a pump, like I had just, whatever, had to give a shot at dinner in a restaurant. And everyone, the majority of the comments are like, oh my God, this is amazing. Like, yeah, like you don't have to go to the bathroom, like all of these, hundreds of comments. And then there was one this morning that I happened to see that just like popped up that was like, this is disgusting and inhumane. Like you are grossing other people out who are paying to go eat dinner. And I was like, everyone, or like just you? Like I just kind of like commented back a little bit. I don't usually get like that. And then she was like 90% of people. And I was just like, I responded, I was like, 90%? Wow, interesting stat. Like, what am I gonna say, like past that? But it was like a crappy way to start the day, but then I had to like reshift my whole energy. But it's just like you hit so many of the vast majority of people online and you're going to get comments like that. So okay, I want to do something fun. I don't think this is like many people think this is fun, but like I think we need to do this. So, okay, I think that if anybody walked a day in your shoes or my shoes that didn't have type 1 diabetes and didn't fully understand why you can't just get over it and go in the swimming pool or go, a weekend away or just like eat the ice cream and stop, worrying about it or whatever it is, they would be like, oh my gosh, like so apologetic because they truly understand what it's like. So what I would love to do is I would love to like take a scenario. You can help me pick, but maybe it's like even just like the thought of going to get like a certain meal or going to work out in the afternoon. And can we like, I would love for you to like break down all of the steps and questions that go through your mind in order to just do that thing that everybody does on a daily basis without thinking 1,000 things that you have to think of to go into, making that decision to do that. Can we do that?
Yeah.
Does that
Yeah.
sound fun?
Yes. I immediately have a scenario.
Go. Let's do it.
Okay, literally my morning routine, which includes a workout.
Okay.
Uh,
Take us through it.
Because okay, so I wake up and I have my Dexcom that reads my blood sugar, but I like to check it every morning and make sure it's accurate. So I have to prick my finger, which whenever I like my friends want me to take their blood sugar or whatever, one finger prick and they're like, like freaking out. Okay, well, we already got them with the finger prick then. Um, and then I have to think about what workout I'm doing, but not because I'm necessarily trying to figure out which one I want to do, which of course I'm going to do which one I want to do, but whichever exercise I decide I'm going to do determines what I'm going to eat for breakfast because the amount of insulin I want to take before that workout is going to change depending on what workout I'm doing. So then I'm like, okay, I want to cycle today. I want to spin. That's cardio. My blood sugar drops from that. So I'm not going to eat a carb heavy breakfast because I don't want to have a lot of insulin on board, but I definitely want to eat. So I'm going to make something that's high protein, low carb. Okay, cool. Now we're at the gym and I only have a little bit of insulin, but I'm on the bike and I'm halfway through. Shoot, I need some sugar. My blood sugar is dropping. I'm going to get off the bike. I'm going to go get a coconut water. I'm going to drink it. Okay, I'm going to wait a few minutes and then I'm going to continue my workout. And then we're done with my workout. And now my blood sugar is going up from finishing the workout and from the coconut water. So now I'm like, okay, that's awesome. Great, great, great. So now I have to correct it a little bit because it's a little bit too high to just go down on its own after the workout. I know it's going to stay high. And now we're literally only like an hour into the morning. Like, it's all that.
And okay, let me just throw something in there because in our group coaching program last night, we were talking about menstrual cycle we have a group coaching program for women with type 1 diabetes. And that was like the topic of last night's call. And we were talking about how, like, if you're a person with a menstrual cycle, like you have every single day, your hormones, specifically progesterone, is at a different level. And so, depending on what day, if it's day 17 or 19 of your cycle, or 19 or day 6, like your level of insulin resistance or just how fast your insulin will come down from a high blood sugar is going to differ. And it's not math like, oh, we're just going to give 1 unit and then 1 unit's going to bring me down from 200 to 150. It's like that day you could need 1.3, you can need 1.6, you can need 2.0, you can need 3.0, you can need zero point 0.5. So it's 1,000 different decisions and all of these calculations that you're doing in your head at all times, that when somebody just sees you from the outside, you're like, oh, Soph just got up. Okay, she tested her blood sugar. Like, that's not terrible. And then there's like 5 different things that you're thinking. And then you get to the gym. Okay, she's working out. Oh, she's slowing down. Like, what's the big deal? Like, you're not really seeing what's going on inside of your head, which can be exhausting sometimes. Yeah, it's nothing's just as simplified, and things that like everybody does of just working out or going to meet a friend for coffee or like eating a meal, like don't take those things for granted because like we have to, in order to keep our blood sugar in range, we're doing the job of our pancreas, which and my favorite thing is to say like I had a guest on the podcast that said this one, so it's not mine, but he's like, you're doing the job of your pancreas, and a pancreas doesn't have emotions. So we have this like emotional experience on top of it as well, which just completely like can overcomplicate things. And to like your point of before, when your ex-girlfriend was kind of like, well, why can't you just, almost like black and white, like why can't you could just go without feeling this way? It's like, well, because that's your experience and that's those emotions are coming up. And even though it says, you can, or even though you see people on social media that are just doing all these things, like people have very valid triggers and fears and uncertainties, and you have to work past those. And that might take you a year, it could take somebody 5 years, it could take somebody 30 years before getting to that point with type 1 diabetes that they feel that sense of confidence. So for you, what, I guess, what's like one misconception that you feel like a lot of people have that you kind of, I don't know, not like want to set the record straight, but you wish that like more people on social media who come to your page, they would understand more of?
I think honestly, people just assume that once it's not new, it's not hard.
Mm,
Like, I think, especially because at the beginning, I showed a lot of the lows figuratively and literally, but like the mental lows. And then over time, I just kind of didn't because they kind of happened all the time. Like it's just every day a lot. It's just like something sucks with diabetes, and I just kind of stopped showing it as much. And I think people assume since I've adjusted to it, sort of, that it's not as mentally hard as it was a year ago. And okay, maybe it's not quite as hard as when I was first diagnosed, but it's still a challenge. And I think it will be for a long time, if not forever. And I think that's the main thing. People just kind of, I mean, people stopped asking how I was doing, if I was okay. It was just like, she lives with it. Even my parents, they're never like, how are you doing? It's just like, it's just what I do. And I
mm.
think the biggest thing I wish people knew is that it just like, it never really stops being hard. It just is hard in different ways over time.
Yeah, I love that. And I think too, the seasons of your life, because as things happen, diabetes, or you feel, everybody feels like less great with their diabetes when other things are going on. So when you have like work, that's stuff that's like really, really like just like you're in a high pressure season, or, relationship stuff, and diabetes, it's so easy to like put that last and not prioritize it. And so you might feel that like sometimes when those come, it's actually the hardest to choose to like do that self care and take care of yourself, because like, think about it. Like, I'm just thinking of like people who go through a breakup that don't have type 1 diabetes. Like, think about the people in the movies, right? Like, I haven't, I'm with my now husband for like since high school. So I don't really can't relate to this as much, but like, you just want to sit in bed and like eat ice cream or like feel sorry for yourself and like just do that kind of like things that like as type ones, you might not like be able to do as easily. So just adds these like extra layers of all of that. Um,
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah.
I agree. I always say, even if I get like a cold or something, I'm just like, I get like, the anger comes back up. I get a cold and I'm like, "Ugh," like, I don't want to be sick. And then I was explaining to my now girlfriend, like, if anything else gets added, it feels so heavy because diabetes alone is already so much that add in a headache, add in a cold, it's like, I can't do it. Like, it's too much. And I think
Mm.
it's just like any little thing that gets added just really puts you over the edge.
Is that where the last round of like burnout for you has come from? Like, can we talk about that a little bit? And like, I don't know if you've unpacked it or processed it yet, but what you think the root of that was? Because I think that, burnout typically, so when a lot of people are diagnosed, it doesn't sound like your doctor told you really anything, but like a lot of people will hear like, watch out for diabetes burnout. And it's this thing that you feel like happens after maybe 20 years or 30 years of living with it. It's like, I can't take this anymore. And that's so not the case. Like, we have hundreds of type ones that we coach at Risley and work with. And, a lot of them will come to us and they won't check off like on their application that they're burnt out. But then what they'll say is they're like, I'm just on these roller coaster numbers. And like, I just feel like I like need a reset, and I cannot, like, I have to figure out how to not have these roller coasters because they're impacting my mood, my anxiety, like depression, like all these things. And then on the flip side, a lot of other people who experience burnout will say, I'm not burnt out from the numbers. I'm burnt out because my life is not like solid in a foundation, whether that's relationship, career, not happy where you're living, whatever that looks like. And so diabetes, I don't want to take care of myself. So like, where would you say like that burnout route for you has been?
So I think, so I mentioned or I don't know if we were recording it actually, but I'm moving from Florida to LA,
Mm-hmm.
California. And I'm in a new relationship. And it was becoming a lot mentally because I just wanted to enjoy my life and enjoy, oh my gosh, I'm moving to this new place. I'm trying all these new foods and meeting all these new people. And I'm drinking more often because I'm going out socially, and like I said, I'm in a relationship and we want to like make sweet treats together and we want to go out to eat and whatever. And I'm super type A, especially with my diabetes, and super um, controlling with myself. And so for me, I mean, of course, I still get roller coaster numbers because I'm a type 1 diabetic. So, but it wasn't so much the toll it was taking on me. Like, I wasn't necessarily having harsher numbers or anything like that. It's just like it was in my head. I'm like, I can't take it anymore. I want a break. I want 5 minutes, literally 5 minutes without it. Just give me one day. I will be so thankful for years. Just one day where I don't have to think about it. Like my brain was just so tired of constantly having to control so many things while really wanting to live an exciting part of my life. And I think also it was I would be at like a really high point and I'm like, oh, this is so fun, so much good is happening. If only I didn't have diabetes, everything would be perfect. And that's like a theme that's been happening recently. And it was just the mental, like, God, I just don't want to do it anymore. I just don't want to do it.
Yeah, I hear you. You know, perfection and type 1 diabetes and controlling and type A, like I that was one of my lessons. Like that does not mix, right? So if I can gift you anything, I would gift you the like 80-20 rule, where it's like 80% of diabetes, like to control, quote unquote, control diabetes, 80% is fine tuning of like knowing your patterns, knowing what happens to your blood sugars when you eat sushi, how to get more proactive versus reactive, all those things. And then 20% at the end of the day is needs to be the mindset and the acceptance for when diabetes is going to diabetes. And like that completes the confidence and that empowered self that lives with type 1 diabetes. Because if we try to get it 100% all right all the time, or if we expect ourselves to feel 100% perfect all the time and like, oh, we love diabetes and we love life, like it's just we're going to let ourselves down like
Right.
constantly.
Yeah. I love that. I think that reminds me, I don't remember where I heard it, but it like rings in my head all the time. A good blood sugar is not worth more than a happy life. I
Mm.
love that quote. It's always circling my brain. And I just think it reminds me of what you just said. Like, sure, yes, you want to manage your blood sugar, but what's the point of living a super long, healthy life if you're not happy? Like you
Oh,
of course take care of yourself, but also let yourself relax sometimes and enjoy your life.
well, yeah, and not at the expense. You're not going to like, yeah, do be so focused on diabetes at the expense of like your happiness. Like there was a part of my journey, which I don't know if you know, but like a very big turning point was I was a junior in college, like should have been out, going to parties or hanging out with people. And like, I was so isolating. Like I was so isolated. I was isolating myself. I was saying like no to going to the movies because I was like, oh well, I can't have the popcorn, or like I just want to make my healthy meal at home. Whatever. Went to Italy, studied abroad, like literally ate. I mean, I indulged, but like I was very, very hyper focused and not in the moment the majority of the time I was there. Came home, went to the endo, and my A1C was a 5.7. And I was being like high fived, and I was like, they were like, oh my God, you're doing amazing. This is like, you're at peak health for a diabetic. And I literally was sitting there like crawling out of my skin. Like, I feel like I can't do this anymore and I can't uphold this expectation that this is what it means. And so I went to from this place of like roller coastering the majority of my teenage years with my blood sugars because I wasn't educated, didn't know my patterns, all of that, then flipped to the other side and then had to spend a couple of years figuring out like what does that balance look like what is an A1C number that feels good and healthy for me, that allows me to go out with my friends, travel, experience the world.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think that's what I've spent the last year learning. And I think I'm still trying to figure out how to. I've gotten really great at allowing myself to, indulge in foods and enjoy myself, but I still have that voice in my brain. So I've gotten to the point where at least I'm doing it. Like
Mm-hmm.
I'm eating the foods and everything, but I'm just working on quieting the voice while I'm doing so I can enjoy it more as I'm doing it.
Yeah. And And giving yourself grace and forgiving yourself, like forgiving yourself quickly and saying, how can I be more curious instead of judgmental? That's like my thing, is like curiosity over judgment, because when your blood sugar goes high after a meal, you have a choice to pick up a hammer or a magnifying glass. A hammer where you start like beating yourself up, or a magnifying glass when you're like, that's so interesting. Like, why this time when I had this dinner, like, did my blood sugar, go high, even though I gave the same thing that I had it last week? And that leads you not to a dead end. That leads you to answers, and that leads you to problem solving. And that's a growth centered mindset versus, limited and negative and lives in the world of I can't and restrictions.
Yeah, I like that. A friend of mine, another type 1 diabetic, advice she gave me was, you'll never know how to dose for something if you don't try. And I love that, because like there'll be a food where I'm like, oh, I don't know, I don't want to get it, I don't know how, I don't know what I need. But then I hear her say that, and then I'm like, well, I'm gonna try, and then we'll learn. And there's been foods where it started as a fear, and now I eat all the time because I know exactly what to do, and 8 times out of 10 it goes well.
Right,
Obviously not
right.
all the time, but often.
Right, right. And at the end of the day, like what that really comes back to is what we were talking about earlier with like it's going to feel uncomfortable, but most people shy away from, I don't want to say most, but a lot of people get stuck in the same patterns or stuck in places that they don't want to be in their life because they're uncomfortable with the feeling of change or the feeling of uncertainty. And so our brain is literally wired to crave familiar cycles, even if those familiar cycles do not serve us. It's why people stay in toxic relationships. It's why people, will scroll on social media, late at night when and they're like, why can't I have self-control? Like, other than it's like, obviously like very addictive, but like, why can't I go to bed at the time that I'm trying to go to bed to work out in the morning? I'm trying to like start this new plan. It's like, because it's more comfortable to do that, and it's uncomfortable to put the phone down and change that new habit. But at the base, if you want to change your life and get to a different place than you are currently, you have to step into that discomfort, and then soon it will be a little bit more comfortable eventually. All right, so if I have one last question for you. So if you had to give, no, I'm going to change it. I'm going to change it. I had one written down. I was like, nope, I'm going to change it. So if you think of yourself 5 years from now, so you'll be 28 years old, what do you hope your life looks like with diabetes and your relationship to self and your diabetes? Like, what do you want to call in for that future vision?
I really hope that I still have the same determination to be okay as I do now. Like, I still want that same drive to figure it out. I hope that I I hope I've learned more that allows me to live more. And I also hope that as I've lived with it more, the fears of the different possible long-term things that can happen, I hope that's dwindled out, and I'm not quite so worried about it because it's already started to dwindle out. And so I hope that by then I'm really just living my life alongside diabetes rather than having it be so forefront. I hope it's more tucked away in the brain and just sort of part of my life and not mine.
I love that. Well, we'll check in. We'll bring you back in 5 years and we'll see how you're doing. So can you plug yourself for anybody who is just finding you through this podcast episode? So where can people follow you on your journey?
Yeah, so it's just at Soph Mosca on everything: TikTok, Instagram, YouTube. I also have a podcast called Happy Human Club that's available on all streaming platforms. And yeah, that's pretty much me.
So good. I love the title, Happy Human Club. That's like very representative of you and your very bright personality. Well, thank you so much for spending this past hour with me. It was such an honor to have you on. And thank you for your openness, your vulnerability, and for your bravery. I will say also for, sharing your journey online with all of us.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
See you later, Soph.
Bye.
Thank you so much for being here with me today and listening to this episode of Reclaim Your Rise. To let us know that the episodes we're putting out are impactful and to help us get our street cred up and let everyone else know that this is something worthy of their time to listen to, please leave a rating and review on our Apple Podcast, send the show to other people impacted by T1D or maybe even your doctor, and share it on social media tagging at Risely Health and at Lauren_Bongiorno. New episodes of Reclaim Your Rise come out every single Tuesday, so make sure you are subscribed to the podcast so that you never miss a beat. Thanks again for listening, and as always, remember, diabetes is a challenge that we did not choose, but one that we can rise above.